Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the show.
On a beach in the sand, I think of you. I think of you. Did you realize I love you all my life? And when you're gone, I'm all alone.
Welcome back. I have a very important show for you today. I'm going to introduce my list of the top 3 human beings that ever lived, and then I'm going to tell you what I know about the number 1. I'm sure you will be surprised at this list. Number 3 on this list would be the President Abraham Lincoln. The sacrifices that he made for humanity were indeed great and worthy of being in the top 3 of my most important human beings. And then there is Jesus Christ. He's at the top of my list simply because of what he tried to do for humanity, and he was a master of the 7 Hermetic principles. I don't believe for 1 minute that a person must give Jesus their soul in order to go to heaven. Jesus never said that. But I do believe that from his heart, he was indeed trying to find the greatest things that he could do for humanity. And actually, because he was written about, and the writings about him will last forever, he is indeed important. However, let me talk about the number 1 human being that ever lived, in my opinion. He's a very little known person called Hermes the Thrice Great. Hermes the Thrice Great was by far the greatest human being that ever lived. He was indeed responsible for everything. There would be no civilization here had it not been for Hermes. Let me tell you why. If you ever want to know anything about Hermes, he is the main character in the book that I wrote, Ungodly Gods. Allow me to read just an introduction of some of the things that Hermes was responsible for. Hermes, whose resume reads as follows: the contemporary of Abraham, the writer of Asclepius, the Corpus Hermeticum, the Emerald Tablets, the Kabbalion, the Divine Pymander, the Tabula Smeraldina, the Way of Hermes, and the Vagini of the World. These are just a few of the more than 2,000 books written by Master Hermes, who is also known as the Messenger of the Gods, founder of the occult wisdom, founder of astrology, geometry, discovery of alchemy. As I said, he is known as the scribe of the gods, lord of wisdom, learning, literature, and travel. He is also the founder of the 7 Hermetic Principles. We can, in fact, go on and on about the description of Hermes, but let me just say this. There would be no successful civilization here had it not been for Hermes. It was said that Hermes was from Atlantis. And the most extraordinary thing about Hermes is he had the ability to reincarnate and then remember all of the lives that he lived before. He would basically pick up where he left off. And they knew it was him because he would always leave something somewhere that only he knew the placement of that thing was. While Hermes lived in Atlantis, his father Zeus, his brother Apollo, his sister Persephone, these were the gods that were considered the Greek pantheon. While Hermes was a teenager, he then was going by the name of Ningasita. Hermes was summoned to Mesopotamia by Enki himself. Enki, if you don't know who that is the Elohim in the book of Genesis, one of the fallen angels that created mankind in their own image. Not only was Hermes summoned, Hermes was also a part of the operation when they created mankind. In both phases, phase 1, Adam and Eve, and then there was a flood, and then phase 2, where they used a primate called the bonobo and created mankind in the second sequence. So Hermes was actually there when Adam and Eve was born. Now this is something that a lot of people didn't know. The Garden of Eden story was in fact a story about Hermes and Enki. Hermes and Enki were indeed the 2 snakes in the Garden of Eden. The only reason they were called snakes was because Enki's brother, the Anunnaki, called him Enlil. The Bible calls him the god Yahweh, who forced Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, in fact, came to inspect the creation of Enki and Hermes. And he was very upset. The reason Yahweh was upset more than anything was the fact that they were not supposed to be making beings that look like them. They were supposed to be making a workforce, some kind of a subspecies, so you can tell the difference between them and, more like a pet than anything else. These beings were being created to replace the Igigi, the species that used to assist the Anunnaki in the mining of gold and everything before they began to protest about it. So whenever you hear the term Hermetic, like the caduceus, for instance, that is the Hermetic symbol of medicine. Whenever you see an ambulance go down the street, you'll see a snake, 1 or 2 snakes rising on a staff. That's the Hermetic symbol of medicine. The reason that is the symbol is because those 2 snakes are the snakes from the Garden of Eden who began to teach human beings how to take care of yourself. You cannot create beings without teaching them how to eat, how to be clean, how to exist. How are the first 2 beings on the planet going to exist without any kind of intervention? That was the intervention from Hermes. Now, the thing about it is, once these beings reached a certain level, now we're talking about Neanderthals and cavemen and things like that. Well, these beings had to be taught not only the basics, but once they started to evolve, all the sciences, the astrology, the religions, all these things was developed by Hermes himself. Hermes is the one who was behind the religion that was set forth in the Hebrew. And I'm going to tell you something else that is very fascinating. Before I tell you that, let me tell you what else Hermes was responsible for. Once he had risen civilization up to a certain level, that's when the Egyptian pantheon began. Isis and Osiris were the first two kings and queens of Egypt. Isis was the first Homo sapien sapien, which means Isis was the missing link. The missing link was when Darwin had started to create his pattern of evolution. There were several problems with it because beings do not evolve that quickly. If we came from apes, why are apes still apes? Well, because it takes millions and millions of years to evolve. These beings evolve very quickly because they were genetically engineered at each point. Once they got to the point where they were Homo sapien, they were almost human except for the fact that they had a unibrow and they still had a animalistic type Neanderthalistic look. The reason that Isis was the first Homo sapien sapien was because Hermes knew exactly what he had to do to make this happen. Instead of Jeb and Nut, the parents of Osiris and Isis, producing Isis, Hermes stepped in, and it was Hermes who impregnated Nut. Isis' true father was Hermes. When I say this man was the most important human being that ever lived, I mean every word of it. First of all, he was there for the creation of Adam and Eve. Then he was there for the Garden of Eden. He was a snake in the Garden of Eden, he and Enki. And now he's the true father of Isis, the missing link. Then he was also responsible for the birth of Horus, because Isis' husband, Osiris, was killed by his brother Set in a rage of jealousy. It was the kind of thing where he wanted to be king and Osiris was in the way. He attempted to kill him 2 times. One time he chopped him up, Hermes put him back together. The second time he chopped him up, well, he made it a little more difficult to be put back together by spreading the body parts all over. Hermes is the one who was able to find the gonads of Osiris and take that material and impregnate Isis. That was the first concept of an immaculate conception. Later on, of course, we found out that there were others. However, the first one was the immaculate conception of Isis and her son Horus. And all these stories that I'm telling you can be fact-checked. My book is nonfiction, except for the 2 little parts about the angel hive that I put in there for my granddaughter, and a couple of other things, but these parts are indeed facts. Another thing that makes Hermes the most important human being that ever lived was his mystery schools in Egypt. He created those schools, and that is the schools where Jesus attended. The only image that they really have of Hermes with a face on it would be the image of Hermes with a lamb over his shoulders, and that lamb statue was called the Good Shepherd. So we know who also was called the Good Shepherd, Jesus himself. Now here is the part where the whole thing gets interesting as hell. And you're going to only find this out here because the research that I had to do to get to this point has to do with a lot of hidden knowledge that I was able to find, and I don't know if anybody else is going to be able to find that, but I was able to find it. In order to call a book nonfiction, you have to have at least 3 separate sources. Well, I was able to find 3 separate sources of this story. When I say Hermes, through his incarnations, he would spend time in what we call heaven. Well, it's not really, it's just an in-between kind of space, a purely spiritual place, an ethereal place where there are a lot of angels. If you believe in angels, well, this is where they are. This is where they come from. Between the lives of Hermes, he was able to come back and write books and articulate what he was doing while he was gone. One of the things that Hermes did while he was gone was he met a man. Well, he wasn't really a man, he was an angel. This angel was the one Lucifer. Hermes and Lucifer became friends. The extraordinary story, I could write a book on just the two of them. Lucifer was, in fact, one of the most misunderstood characters in the Bible. And that is because when the Bible was written, it was written to have a good guy and a bad guy. The good guy, of course, would be Jesus. The bad guy would be Lucifer. These are how stories are developed. These are how stories are created. If you look at a movie, you have your good, your bad, and maybe an ugly or something like this. This is how stories are developed. Well, in this space, this ethereal realm where there were angels, there was a disagreement that took place. This disagreement was between Lucifer and the leader of Earth Station Number 1, the Anunnaki, the one they called Anu, who the Bible called Jehovah. There was a battle between Lucifer and Jehovah. Well, it wasn't a battle yet. What it was simply this. Jehovah, or Anu, was a part of a family, a group of people that came here from another place, from a planet called Nibiru. These are the whole Anunnaki pantheons, the ones they call the fallen angels. They created mankind. But not only did they create mankind, they created them in such a way that they wanted them to believe that their creators were the creator of everything, the creator of the entire universe. Now, the Bible sort of went with this misconception. And the original Hebrew Bible didn't even start off in the beginning. It started off in the beginning of this story, which basically meant it was just a story. It wasn't meant to be taken literally. In fact, I'll get into the King James Bible, where when the King James Bible was created, when it was edited, nowhere in that Bible did it even say it was supposed to be the Word of God. So anyway, what the problem was, the Anunnaki, Jehovah, was pretending to be the creator of everything, when all they really did was created mankind. They were an advanced species. They created the pyramids, and they did all that, and they even caused the flood. But they did not create the universe. They were not the creator. They were created beings. But they felt that since they created their own beings, then that would be enough so they could consider themselves gods. Created beings are not supposed to create beings, because your natural instinct would be to consider yourself their God. There's only one creator of beings. This is the reason why humans have such problems spiritually, because we weren't developed in a proper, we didn't evolve as we should have. They mixed advanced spirituality with new beings. And that's what causes us to be so sporadic and non-balanced. You have new formed brains, and there's a lot of brains that we don't use yet because they weren't properly developed. The reason we only use 10% of our brains is because our evolutionary acceleration allowed us to skip a lot of aspects of learning. If you talk to people who are into child development, and a child is supposed to first creep, and then they get up to their knees, and then they crawl, and then they walk. When you start to introduce them to walkers and things like that before they go from the creep to the crawl, they miss a stage of their development, and it will show later. So basically, beings are supposed to develop naturally. Human beings did not. That's why you have a whole bunch of the brain that is not used. If a human being was able to use his whole brain, he would be on the same level of the beings that created him. So what we're doing is living using a fraction of our brain matter, because that's all we can. And so there was an argument between Lucifer and the Anunnaki leader, Jehovah. Lucifer said, hey, I'm an archangel. I was here billions of years before you were ever created. I was created by the fire of the universe. I am connected to the Creator. If you could be a God, I want to be a God too. That's when the conflict, because Jehovah decided that no, you can't be a God. Now, it wasn't just Lucifer. It was in fact Lucifer and Hermes that was there at the time. Hermes wanted to be a god too, since he felt that he was there when they were created, and he also taught them how to do everything. He taught them everything they knew. He's the one that rose their level. And so now Hermes has been back to Egypt several times. Isis is born. Horus is born. So Hermes, like Lucifer, wanted to be a god right along with, because at the time they had many gods. Gods was not supposed to really be one person. You know, you always had 6 or 7 gods. So, but in this version, these Anunnakis, they had themselves listed like they were one, but there were actually 2. There were Jehovah the Father, Anu, Yahweh the Son, whose real name is Enlil. So Lucifer and Hermes wanted to be added to the 2 so they can live happily ever after and they could be gods. And this is when Jehovah denied them the opportunity of doing so. Well, Lucifer got so upset at that time. What he did was basically said, I'm going to take over the entire religion. And he and Hermes set out to figure out how they were going to take over the entire religion, which was very simple for somebody like Lucifer. Because you have to understand, Lucifer he's not a physical being. He's from a place where the past, present, and future is the same, which means he had one hell of an advantage. Whatever he did to someone, he knew what the final outcome would be. So he came up with something very simple. What he was going to do, what he did, was he created a persona about himself of being very evil. A persona where if you followed him, you would go to a place and burn forever. If you fall into his trap, you will burn forever. But Lucifer also knew that he could be in 2 places at the same time. So he said, so what I'll also do, this is he and Hermes cooking up this plan. What I will also do is create another persona that is just the opposite. In other words, I will make people fear me while at the same time love the other. You have hate on this side and love on this side. We will create a persona. We will create a being over here to chase these beings towards. However, Lucifer is like, I'm going to be in both places. All we need is a volunteer. But not really a volunteer. They needed to find or to create or to develop a being that was going to be so positive, so nice, so appealing from a spiritual standpoint that people would follow him. They also, like I said, you're talking about being a being that knows the past, present, and future. Now, Hermes had already developed the mystery schools in Egypt. And so all they needed to do was for this person to come to the mystery schools and be groomed. So they picked a child, a prophetic child. First, they came up with a story like a prophetic child will be born. And then a prophetic child was. And then the prophetic child was taken and hidden away. Well, he went to Egypt, where he went to the mystery school. Now he's being groomed by Hermes to be this great, loving, wonderful being, all the while not knowing that he is in fact being used by Lucifer and Hermes, really. So Jesus, his name was Yeshua, didn't know what he was in for. It was pretty sad because when Jesus finally showed up, he was already groomed to be this great, loving, wonderful being. None of this stuff up here had anything to do with Jesus. Jesus was loving and wonderful the whole time. What Jesus didn't know was the path that was in front of him Lucifer already knew what was going to happen to him. Lucifer was like, okay, yes, we're going to use him this way and he will be destroyed. But by his destruction, he will also become a martyr. And from that moment on, people will worship him. They will worship him, but they would also, but who they really would be worshiping would be Lucifer, simply because he was Lucifer's creation. The resulting outcome of all this is a separation of all kinds of religions into all kinds of things, and we have been fighting ever since. And this is what Lucifer wanted. He said he wanted to create something that was in opposition of anything divine. I'm just going to tear up the whole system. The way you do that is you create a persona of Jesus and say, hey, if you come over here, you will be saved. Then you have other religions that say, well, we're not coming over here. So they fight. This is why mankind is in the position that it is now. All you have to do is understand, if you are a Christian, and if you believe that Jesus is a positive being, which he is, you have to understand that a positive being would never say, if you don't give me your soul, you're going to burn in hell. Because that's antithetical to positivity, meaning it is opposed. It's an opposition of good. It's in opposition of creation. That alone should let you know. And if you look at the history of Christianity itself, Jesus is not responsible for the evils that people are doing in the name of Jesus. It's just that Lucifer and Hermes created a paradox whereby your love for Jesus could also create a hate for somebody that's not a follower of. The creator of the universe has nothing to do with any of this. We're all supposed to get along. We're not supposed to be divided in this way. And so once we get past this, once we learn all these things and we're educated on how this whole thing happened, and although Jesus was a great and wonderful person, no, you don't have to fight in war. Some of the biggest problems I have with people who are so Christian that they hate me for my book, when actually, if you're a true follower of Jesus, you wouldn't hate anything at all. Jesus represents love. None of this was his fault. He didn't realize he was being used that way. It was a painful thing that happened to him, but Lucifer can be quite damaging. But anyway, thank you for coming, and I'll see you in the next episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe.
Right there, right there. Love me
Subscribe and push the like button.